I would see it very hard for Korea to have competed then with the United States and Germany and England and France. However, now, Korea is, doing better than most countries competitively.
Hi, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Introduce myself, Jacob, so professor.
However you want to call me. Jake, we can be informal.
All right. Okay. I'll call you Jake from now on. Okay, then. Then shall we begin then?
Absolutely.
Okay. Then go from the first question. The first question is about the two protagonists in your book, The Free Market. Adam Smith, of course, and the second guy is Jean-Baptiste Colbert in 18th century France. Why don't you explain more about the Jean-Baptiste Colbert guy? How different could we interpret Adam Smith's picture in this kind of view?
Then you have Adam Smith, the so-called father of capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Smith believed in free trade, but he was very suspicious of industry and of merchants. He was an agrarian, and if you read him very carefully, he says that merchants and artisans and manufacturers are monopolizers, that they do not have the common interest of the country in their strategies. And he said, therefore, what we need, the only way that free trade works is if it all channels back to agriculture, which he said is the most productive form the most economic productive force that there is, and a moral force. And he said that all manufacturing and all trade was actually proportional to agricultural output. So he understood exchange, he understood capital investment, but he did not understand capitalism. He just didn't. Go back and read him again. And once you read the first half very carefully and you put it together with the second half, you see that he profoundly misunderstood wealth creation. He didn't understand it. He thought that nature would push the hands of human beings and create more wealth than industry. At that time, Colbert and then Italians and even Englishmen and Dutchmen before Colbert said there is one source of wealth. It is manufacturing. And it is also, Colbert understood the brain industry. He was the first figure to hire foreigners to come to the country to lead research. This is the visionary of the modern economy. And this is how America grew. This is how Germany grew. This is how Japan grew. This is how China grew. But it's really also profoundly the story of South Korea. Adam Smith does not explain South Korea. Colbert does.
So speaking of which, Adam Smith's picture, as we know of, is like this. He was the first guy to call for the full endorsement of the freedom of enterprise. That is what the kind of a picture of Adam Smith that is familiar to us. But in your view, that is a very misguided one.
Well, first of all, people have been calling it for more than 100 years. There's very little original material in his book. What's original is how he puts it together and how he writes about it. Smith was a literary genius. He explained things that no one had ever explained. But he also is the representative of an oligarchic landed class that sees this new industry coming and wants to is brilliant to find a model for capitalism that is still grounded in oligarchic land ownership. He's protecting the interest. He himself, I just got back from Scotland where I spoke at the 300th anniversary of Smith, and I saw his house and I heard the story of his family, from a family of very big landowners. He worked for very big landowners. He represented his class and he was protecting its interests. But he was a completely visionary, explainer of things, that he misunderstood the fundaments of capitalism and market building. You do not build a market by let's just put it this way. If in 1980, Korea had just opened up its borders, or if in 1975, it would have never had this economy, America would have dumped everything into it. I would see it very hard for Korea to have competed then with the United States and Germany and England and France. However, now Korea's, doing better than most countries competitively. But how Korea got there is a story which I think is very comparable to the story of France, 17th century.
Your book seems to be rendering most of the readers very perplexed in some way, because if you're right, then Adam Smith and the Adam Smith's thinking has very little to do with what we now believe in as a free market. From what kind of source this idea of the free market came from?
To answer your question, I just want to start with just a couple questions.
Okay.
I want you to notice which countries call for free markets. By the way, right now, would Korea like to see open borders for cars, cell phones, and computers?
No. Hell no.
But would they like us to have open borders for cars and computers?
So we are demanding it, but we know that it is too much. Yeah.
Well, but the thing is that right now, if America had more open borders for Korean products, Korea would dominate, because right now Korea creates the most reliable cars with the Japanese, and also is the only other large-scale producer of cell phones in the world, and one of the few producers of computers. My students only use Apple or Samsung, maybe some other stuff, but this is it. Right now, Korea is at this moment when you have a market dominance and you can compete successfully. You want the open borders. England in the 19th century. Let's think about this for a minute. I want you to think about this. England called itself a free market nation, and it had very few market laws in the middle of the 19th century. But I want you to think about the rest of the world. The rest of the world was dominated by the British Empire. It's not a free market. This is like under a gun. You have people under a gun, and the British were stealing literally dozens of trillions of dollars were being extracted from Asia, India, South America, everything, the Caribbean. I'm not going to get into that, but I want you to think what kind of free market that is. The fact is, it's very easy to say there also had, not complete by the second half of the century, France has arrived and Germany is coming and Japan is about to start coming too. But they had dominance of industry and they had an imperial control of a huge chunk of the world. Of course you want a free market.
Yeah.
After World War II, let's look at the world after World War II. Asia, there's nothing there, which is hard to imagine today, but I remember when Asia was poor, right? That was not that long ago. Now, honestly, there are parts of Asia which are the richest, most advanced places in the world, and you're sitting in one of them, okay? Europe was bombed out. So America had the entire industrial base of planet Earth for a while. Think about that. What a great time to call for free markets. Now, it just so happened that in the countries America helped, that was a remarkable strategy and a very effective one to get these formerly industrialized countries and some countries that had not industrialized slowly to help allies like Taiwan and South Korea industrialize, and then to give some market freedoms was a brilliant mix. Remember, it's always a mix. There's never a total free market.
Right.
Okay. But the other thing that's very interesting is after the war, you get these figures like Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman. They had a thought, which I call, and I'll have to be honest about this, a paranoid form of free market.
Paranoid. All right.
That they believe that any and all state involvement in the allocation of wealth would lead to totalitarianism. Now, I've been attacked a lot in the United States for saying any and all because Hayek believed in soup kitchens, welfare, but welfare for Hayek really literally meant like soup kitchens and like not much. But then I thought, has there ever been a moment, even in the 80s and 90s, when the state has not been heavily involved in economic growth? Under Reagan, we had a massive spending, I mean massive, on the military. Well, the military, if you look at all of its parts, is like 60% or more of our economy. And they also put a huge amount of money in research and development. My father's a scientist. It was a golden age with money raining down on public laboratories and private laboratories. So America calls for free markets at this moment of absolute dominance. It does it strategically, and I think a way that's quite remarkable. Also begins this attempt to try and open up China, which is a totally different story. But it's never a totally free market. It's strategic. But this paranoid form, if you go to earlier free market thinkers, Smith believes the state has to be quite heavily involved. He says that. He doesn't insist on it. But if you read carefully, he says that the military, defense, security should not be free. Well, that's 60% of the economy. He says that at certain points you need tariffs, you need subventions. If we go to the 19th century British free market thinkers, they always think that there should be a caveat, that the state has to have a specific role. Only after the war, these guys who are not only paranoid about the state, and I understand why, Nazism and totalitarian communism are horrific, scary things, right? So I get, and I say this in the book, they were really right about that. But the idea that, Friedman has a whole chapter on how the state should not give medical licenses. I happen to have studied the history of medicine in Europe. Medical licenses will begin in the 1300s. In Montpellier, which has the big medical school in the Middle Ages, there is no functional medical institution in the world that does not have state oversight. This was what I consider, and this is a very important book by Friedman that everybody reads. I mean, I would actually say insanity. It has no basis in reality. It is not applicable. And yet people behave as that this is a normal thing, that the state shouldn't give medical licenses. Who should give medical licenses? Doctors? Which doctors? Because without medical licenses, I actually find it nihilistic and quite mad. Go read the chapter where he says no medical licenses. You will come back and say, that's quite mad. That's absolutely not possible. Without the state oversight in degrees, I wonder how well Korean medicine would work.
At the end of your remark, you were referring to the some kind of discrepancies between reality and the ideology. So in reality, we cannot follow the monotheistic kind of a free market thought blindly. And very recently, especially since the 2008 financial crisis, people begin to realize that kind of discrepancy is actually existing. And especially since the COVID crisis and Ukraine war crisis and so on, we have been witnessing some kind of undermining in big time of the belief in free market thought. Protectionist practices is coming back, and inflation is rampant everywhere and so on. So we would like to hear what is your experience of talking with policymakers, economists in United States and Europe about this kind of discrepancies between the reality and the ideology.
Well, I mean, first of all, when Trump came to power, he put tariffs on European wine and cheese. I was very upset. That's the kind of thing that I think is really bad idea. Okay. Actually, I wish we had more access to Korean beef. Even though we should all eat less beef, I would rather be eating Korean beef because very special beef. Putting these tariffs up, for me, this is free trade is wonderful in that sense. But this is one of the great lessons. We call it potato chips versus computer chips. And I talked about this. By the way, I have not yet tried Korean potato chips. I want to. I've tried Japanese potato chips. And I assume Korean potato chips also, because the best potatoes in Japan come from Hokkaido. I assume Korea has fantastic potatoes. Okay. And I need to come to Korea specifically to try Korean potatoes. But so you can have your potato chip factory ideally in Korea and not in America, but your computer chip factory, that's a little bit more complicated. That's what we're now calling securonomics. Having certain things like certain medications, masks for pandemics, having computer chips in other countries, this is problematic. And so, or actually, I would actually argue solar panels. Right now in the United States, if you buy a solar panel, it is from China. What if we get into a worse situation with China? And they just, right now, sadly, it makes me extremely sad that we're in this situation of conflict. Whose fault it is? These are complex questions, right? But I think this is terrible. I do think we should be trading freely, but there has to be rules, right? And Korea knows this with China. Without rules, it doesn't work, because if people are stealing intellectual property, it's no good. Actually, it's not good in the long term. This new securonomics, I see the reason for it, and I am partially convinced of its necessity. I also see the dangers of it, because I believe that the market is often efficient at things. But for example, the market has not been efficient in computer chip production. Putting its major base in Taiwan, that's crazy. I mean, I love Taiwan, and they've done it, and I give them credit for it, and they should benefit for it. But having the whole production in an island that's completely unstable is absolute madness. Over and over again, the market makes huge mistakes. It also does a better job in certain things. So these are hard questions. I'm not saying the market that we should be deciding all these things on how things are produced and provisioned, but the market makes errors. I was just thinking about another thing, again, like solar panels. All solar panels are coming from China. That's actually not a good thing for anybody. So we need competition, and we do need, I believe America needs a solar industry, because if there's more conflict, we need to be able to be competitive in this. There's another point here, and Korea is literally the kind of poster child. If you have high-end, both heavy industry and high-tech manufacturing in your country, then the actual innovation happens on the factory floor. And not only do you have more innovation, but you have much higher salaries. So Korea is benefiting from the fact that it's producing the most important things in the world, the most high-tech things. Korea is not interested in the potato chips. It's interested in the computer chips. It's interested in the batteries. It's interested in cell phone production. And the fact is that makes Korea rich. And even if China closes its borders to Korea, Korea is still producing these things that will create more wealth. This is what Smith never understood.